For 10 years, a retired military Belgian Malinois named Sentinel kept a daily vigil at his handler's grave in the veterans' cemetery, through scorching summers and bitter winters, refusing to abandon his post despite numerous adoption attempts. When cemetery officials checked the sealed personnel records from the handler's final mission, what they discovered explained the dog's unwavering loyalty and uncovered a truth that would shake the entire military community to its core. Before we jump into this extraordinary story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story of loyalty beyond death touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something truly special for you. Lakewood National Veterans Cemetery stretched across 40 acres of gently rolling hills in western Pennsylvania, its perfectly aligned white marble headstones standing in solemn formation against the backdrop of the Allegheny Mountains. This hallowed ground, with its immaculate landscaping and quiet dignity, had become the final resting place for thousands who had served their country across generations of conflict. From World War II veterans now passing into history to those who had fallen in more recent conflicts in the Middle East, Lakewood honored them all with the same meticulous care and reverence that had earned it recognition as one of the nation's most beautiful military cemeteries. At the heart of Lakewood's operations stood Director Robert Simmons, a 30-year Army veteran whose own combat experience in Desert Storm had left him with both a Purple Heart and an unwavering commitment to honoring those who had served. Tall and still maintaining the ramrod-straight posture of his military years, despite now being in his 60s, Simmons ran the cemetery with a combination of compassion and precision. His silver hair was kept in a neat military cut, and he wore his cemetery director's uniform with the same pride he had once worn his army dress blues. Under his leadership, Lakewood had become more than just a cemetery. It had become a living memorial where families found comfort and visitors gained a deeper appreciation for the sacrifice of military service. But even among the thousands of stories of courage and sacrifice represented by each headstone at Lakewood, the story of Staff Sergeant Michael Harrington and his military working dog Sentinel stood apart. Harrington had been a dog handler with the Army's 87th Military Police Battalion, serving 3 combat tours in Afghanistan before his death during a classified operation in 2013. His grave, located in Section 14, under the spread of a mature oak tree, would have been unremarkable among the hundreds surrounding it, if not for its daily visitor. Sentinel, a Belgian Malinois with a lean, muscular build and intelligent amber eyes, had somehow found his way to the cemetery shortly after Harrington's burial and had established what could only be described as a vigil at his former handler's grave. Day after day, year after year, the dog appeared at dawn and remained until dusk, lying beside the white marble headstone with an attentiveness that never wavered. During thunderstorms, he would press himself against the stone as if protecting it. On blistering summer days, he would move only as the shade shifted. In the decades since Harrington's burial, Sentinel had become as much a part of Lakewood as the ceremonial flags and bugle calls. "Morning, Margaret," Simmons called as he entered the cemetery's administrative building on a crisp autumn morning. The front office coordinator, a woman in her early 50s with reading glasses perpetually perched on her head, looked up from her computer with a warm smile. "Good morning, Director," she replied, reaching into her desk drawer and producing a dog treat. "I've already seen our resident guardian this morning, Right on schedule, as always. Simmons nodded, glancing out the window toward Section 14, where, sure enough, the familiar figure of Sentinel could be seen in his customary position. 10 years, he murmured, more to himself than to Margaret. Never seen anything like it. The mystery of Sentinel had become something of a legend, not just at Lakewood, but throughout the surrounding community of Mill Creek. In the early days after Harrington's funeral, the military working dog's appearance had caused concern. Attempts had been made to capture him, with the assumption that he was a stray that had somehow wandered onto the grounds. But Sentinel had proven elusive when approached, maintaining a wary distance from cemetery staff while never straying far from Harrington's grave. When his identity was eventually established through his military tattoo and microchip, the story had become even more puzzling. According to official records, Sentinel had been reassigned after Harrington's death and then reportedly died during a training exercise 6 months later. Yet here he was, very much alive and maintaining his daily vigil. Over the years, numerous attempts had been made to coax Sentinel into a new home. Military dog handlers, veterinarians, and animal behaviorists had all tried their hand at winning his trust. The sister of Staff Sergeant Harrington had even visited from Seattle, hoping that the dog might respond to a family connection. While Sentinel accepted food and water left for him and tolerated veterinary checks with stoic resignation, he rebuffed all attempts to lead him away from the cemetery. After several years, a compromise of sorts had been reached. A sturdy doghouse had been installed discreetly behind a nearby maintenance building, and staff took turns ensuring fresh water was always available. Sentinel had become an unofficial cemetery guardian, his presence accepted and even cherished by staff and visitors alike. As Simmons continued toward his office, a young woman he didn't recognize approached the front desk, dressed in army service uniform, with the rank of captain visible on her shoulders. She carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. "Can I help you, Captain?" Margaret asked, setting aside her work. "Captain Alexandra Rivera, Army Special Investigations Division," the officer replied, presenting her credentials. "I have an appointment with Director Simmons." Simmons paused, turning back toward the front desk with curiosity. He had received notification of a visit from Army SID, but had assumed it was a routine review of cemetery operations, standard procedure every few years to ensure compliance with national cemetery regulations. "I'm Robert Simmons," he said, extending his hand. "We weren't expecting you until this afternoon, Captain." "I prefer to be early, sir," Rivera replied with a precise smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And I was hoping to observe the cemetery during normal operations before our official meeting." There was something in her tone that suggested this was more than a standard review, but Simmons kept his questions to himself. 20 years in military intelligence before his final decade of service in more conventional roles had taught him when to wait for information rather than pursuing it, of course. "My office is this way. Margaret, could you bring us some coffee?" As they walked through the administration building toward the director's office, Captain Rivera glanced out every window they passed, her gaze methodically scanning the grounds. When they passed a window with a clear view toward Section 14, she paused almost imperceptibly, her attention caught by the distant figure of Sentinel. "The famous loyal dog," she remarked, her tone carefully neutral. "I've read about him." Simmons raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued further. A routine cemetery inspection wouldn't typically include knowledge of Sentinel. "He's become something of a local legend," he acknowledged. watching Rivera's reaction closely. "Been here every day for 10 years now. Since Staff Sergeant Harrington's burial," Rivera noted, confirming she had indeed done her research. "That's right. You seem well informed about our cemetery, Captain." Rivera turned from the window, meeting Simmons's gaze directly. "I make it a point to be thorough, Director, particularly when it comes to matters involving decorated soldiers and military working dogs who were reportedly killed in action." The implication was clear. Captain Rivera wasn't here for a routine inspection. Her visit had something to do with Harrington and Sentinel. Simmons gestured toward his office door, his curiosity now fully engaged. "In that case, I think we should begin our discussion immediately." Inside his office, Simmons took his seat. Behind a desk that reflected his organized nature, military awards and photographs from his service years were displayed on one wall, while certificates and recognitions from his time as cemetery director occupied another. Through the window, behind him, the rolling landscape of Lakewood was visible, with its perfect rows of white markers extending into the distance. Captain Rivera declined the offered seat, remaining standing as if delivering an official briefing. "Director Simmons, I'll be direct. I'm here as part of a reopened investigation into the operation that resulted in Staff Sergeant Harrington's death in 2013. New information has come to light that contradicts the original after-action reports." Simmons leaned back slightly, surprised but careful not to show it. "I'm not sure how I can assist with that, Captain. Staff Sergeant Harrington is interred here, but we have no information about the circumstances of his death beyond what was included in his interment paperwork. As you likely know, it was listed as killed in action during a classified operation." "I understand that," Rivera acknowledged. "However, there is one piece of evidence that has been here all along that may be crucial to our investigation." She paused, glancing toward the window. "The dog, Sentinel." "Sentinel? He's certainly unusual, but I'm not sure how he connects to your investigation." Rivera reached into her briefcase and removed a file folder. From it, she extracted a photograph and placed it on Simmons's desk. It showed a younger Sentinel in military working gear alongside Staff Sergeant Harrington, both in combat uniforms in what appeared to be Afghanistan. Sentinel wasn't just any military working dog, Director. He was part of a specialized program training dogs for covert operations. These dogs were taught not just to detect explosives or track targets, but to memorize complex sequences, recognize unusual behavioral patterns, and essentially serve as living recording devices in situations where electronic surveillance wasn't possible. Simmons studied the photograph, noting the unusually specialized equipment both the handler and dog were wearing. "I've heard rumors about such programs, but never saw confirmation during my time in intelligence." "Few did," Rivera confirmed. "It was highly classified. What makes this relevant now is that Sentinel was with Harrington during his final mission. According to official records, both Harrington and Sentinel were killed. Harrington's body was recovered and returned for burial. Sentinel's was reportedly too difficult to retrieve from the mountainous terrain. Yet here he is," Simmons said, the implications beginning to dawn on him. "Exactly," Rivera nodded. "A dog officially listed as KIA has been keeping vigil at his handler's grave for a decade. More importantly, this dog was specifically trained to remember and potentially communicate complex information. We believe Sentinel wasn't just bonded to Harrington. He may be the only witness to what actually happened on that mission." Simmons stood and moved to the window, looking out toward Section 14, where the distant figure of Sentinel maintained his vigil. The dog's presence had always been viewed as a touching display of canine loyalty, a military working dog unable to accept the loss of his handler. But Rivera's information cast his presence in an entirely new light. Could Sentinel actually be maintaining his post for a reason beyond grief or loyalty? You mentioned new information contradicting the official reports, Simmons said, turning back to face Rivera. What changed after all these years? Rivera hesitated, clearly calculating. How much to share? 3 months ago, a former intelligence operative approached us through back channels with allegations that the operation resulting in Harrington's death wasn't what it appeared to be. This source claimed that Harrington may have uncovered something he wasn't supposed to see, something that certain individuals wanted to ensure never came to light. You're suggesting he was deliberately targeted? Simmons asked, his military training allowing him to maintain his composure despite the shocking implication. We're investigating that possibility, Rivera confirmed. The problem is that most of the mission records were either classified at such high levels that even our investigation has limited access, or they've been conveniently lost in administrative transfers. The team members who survived have all provided statements that align perfectly with the official version, too perfectly according to our behavioral analysts, which leaves Sentinel as your best witness, Simmons concluded, the bizarre reality of the situation settling in. Potentially, yes. The program Sentinel was part of included training on how to communicate complex information through specific behavioral sequences. If something did happen that contradicted the official reports, and if Sentinel witnessed it, he might still be trying to complete his final mission. Simmons finished the thought, looking back toward the window, to honor his handler by revealing the truth. The theory seemed far-fetched, even fantastical, but Simmons had seen enough in his military career to know that truth often exceeded the boundaries of ordinary expectation, and it would explain Sentinel's unprecedented decade-long vigil. Not just loyalty to a fallen handler, but a trained military asset still attempting to fulfill his purpose. Margaret's knock interrupted their conversation as she entered with coffee. After she left, closing the door behind her, Rivera continued, "We need your help, Director Simmons. I've brought a specialist with me, a former trainer from the program who worked with both Harrington and Sentinel. With your permission, we'd like to attempt to engage with Sentinel here on the grounds to see if we can determine whether he's still exhibiting the trained response patterns that might indicate he's carrying information." Simmons considered the request carefully. His responsibility was to maintain the dignity and sanctity of the cemetery, to protect the honored dead who rested beneath his care and provide a place of peace for those who mourned them. Allowing an investigative team to pursue a theory that might disturb that peace wasn't a decision to be made lightly. Yet, if Rivera's suspicions had merit, if Staff Sergeant Harrington had indeed been deliberately silenced rather than falling in honorable combat, didn't the cemetery have an equal obligation to the truth? Wasn't revealing such a deception also a way of honoring the fallen? "Who knows about this investigation, Captain?" he asked finally. "Very few people," Rivera assured him. "My direct superior, the specialist I mentioned, and now you. We're keeping this contained until we determine whether there's substantive evidence to pursue." Simmons nodded, coming to a decision. "You have my conditional cooperation, Captain. You may proceed with your specialist, but with 3 stipulations. First, you will not disturb any visitors to the cemetery or interfere with any scheduled services. Second, you will not attempt to remove Sentinel from the grounds without explicit permission. And third, you will keep me fully informed of any findings that might impact the cemetery or its operations. Agreed, Rivera said promptly, extending her hand to seal the arrangement. As they shook hands, Simmons couldn't help but glance once more toward the window, toward the distant figure that had become such a familiar part of Lakewood's landscape. For 10 years, he had watched Sentinel maintain his vigil, admiring the dog's loyalty while feeling a persistent sense that there was something more to the story than simple canine devotion. Now it seemed that persistent feeling might have been justified all along. Sentinel wasn't just mourning, he was waiting for someone to finally ask the right questions about what had happened to Staff Sergeant Michael Harrington. Waiting for someone to recognize that his presence wasn't just an extraordinary display of loyalty, but a message that had gone unread for a decade. "When will your specialist arrive?" Simmons asked. "He's already here," Rivera replied. "Waiting, in a vehicle at the main entrance. I wanted to speak with you first before bringing him onto the grounds." Simmons reached for his phone. "I'll have security escort him to us. What's his name?" "Master Sergeant Gabriel Ortiz, retired," Rivera said. "He was the primary trainer for the program and worked extensively with both Harrington and Sentinel before their deployment." As Simmons made the call to security, he found himself wondering what other secrets might be buried at Lakewood, not beneath the ground, but in the memories of a dog who had maintained a decade-long mission that no one until now had recognized for what it truly was. Outside, autumn sunlight glinted off the white marble headstones, creating an almost luminous effect across the gently rolling landscape. In Section 14, Sentinel remained at his post, amber eyes alert, watching as he had watched every day for 10 years, waiting, as he had waited, for someone to finally understand what these new developments would reveal about Staff Sergeant Harrington's final mission, and why Sentinel had been maintaining his extraordinary vigil, would soon reshape understanding not just of one soldier's death, but potentially of operations that powerful figures had spent a decade ensuring remained buried in classified shadows. The security vehicle pulled up to the main entrance, where a man in civilian clothes stood waiting. Dressed in khaki pants and a windbreaker with no insignia, he might have passed for any visitor coming to pay respects to a fallen comrade, but his bearing, the alert posture and observant gaze, marked him immediately as military. Only his silver-streaked beard suggested he had left active service behind. As the security officer escorted Master Sergeant Gabriel Ortiz to the administration building, Director Simmons observed his approach through the window. There was something in the man's manner that conveyed both urgency and caution, the measured steps of someone accustomed to walking into uncertain situations. "He's here," Simmons informed Captain Rivera, who had been reviewing documents from her briefcase while they waited. When the door opened, Ortiz stepped in with a crisp nod to Simmons before his attention shifted immediately to Rivera. "Captain," he acknowledged, the formality in his voice suggesting their relationship was professional rather than familiar. "Master Sergeant," Rivera returned with equal formality, "thank you for coming on such short notice." "When it concerns Harrington and Sentinel, I would have come from halfway around the world," Ortiz replied, his voice carrying the faint trace of a Texas accent. I've been waiting 10 years for someone to finally ask the right questions. The statement hung in the air for a moment, its implications adding weight to the already tense atmosphere. Simmons gestured toward the chairs in front of his desk. "Please sit down. I believe we have much to discuss." As they settled into their seats, Simmons studied Ortiz more carefully. The man was in his early 50s, with the weathered complexion of someone who had spent significant time in harsh environments. His hands bore the calluses of physical work, and a thin scar traced along his jawline beneath the beard, but it was his eyes that commanded attention, dark, intensely focused, missing nothing. Master Sergeant Ortiz was the primary developer of the Enhanced Canine Intelligence Program, Rivera explained for Simmons's benefit. He personally trained Sentinel from his selection as a puppy through his deployment with Staff Sergeant Harrington. Ortiz nodded, his expression softening slightly at the mention of the dog. Sentinel was exceptional even by the program's standards. 1 in 1,000 dogs has the cognitive capacity for the training we developed. 1 in 100 of those has the temperament. He had both. Captain Rivera has explained some basics of the program, Simmons said, but I'd appreciate hearing more directly from you. What exactly was Sentinel trained to do that makes him potentially valuable to your investigation after all these years? Ortiz leaned forward, his manner shifting subtly into that of an instructor. The Enhanced Canine Intelligence Program was developed for situations where human operators needed to gather intelligence in environments too sensitive for electronic surveillance. We built on the natural abilities of working dogs, their sensory acuity, pattern recognition and memory, and extended them through specialized training. He reached into his pocket and removed what looked like a coin, placing it on the desk. This is a training token used in the program. Dogs like Sentinel were conditioned to recognize specific objects, behaviors, or individuals, and to memorize sequences of events associated with them. More importantly, they were trained to communicate this information back to their handlers using specific behavioral cues. Like a code, Simmons suggested. Precisely, Ortiz confirmed. A language developed between dog and handler that would be meaningless to anyone else observing. Sentinel could identify individuals based on scent markers and subtle behavioral patterns, even if they changed their appearance. He could recognize specific weapons, materials, or documents, and he could communicate these recognitions through a series of trained behaviors that only his handler would understand. And you believe he might still be carrying information about Harrington's final mission, Simmons concluded, beginning to understand the full significance of the dog's presence at the cemetery. I consider it not just possible but likely, Ortiz said firmly. Military working dogs form bonds with their handlers that most people can't comprehend. That bond wasn't just emotional for dogs in our program. It was the foundation of their communication system. When Harrington died, Sentinel would have recognized his primary communication channel was gone, but the training would have persisted. Like a message with no recipient, Rivera added. Until now, Ortiz corrected. If I can re-establish connection with him, there's a chance, a significant chance, that he could still communicate what he witnessed. Simmons considered this information, weighing it against his responsibilities to the cemetery. What exactly would this process involve? I need to ensure nothing disruptive occurs on these grounds. It would begin with simple observation, Ortiz explained. watching Sentinel's patterns and behaviors around the gravesite, then gradually reintroducing program training cues from a distance, monitoring his responses. If he shows recognition, I would slowly work closer, re-establishing trust. The final phase would involve specialized equipment that might help decode any patterned behaviors he's exhibiting. It could take days, Rivera added, possibly weeks. Or it might not work at all, Ortiz acknowledged candidly. 10 years is a long time, even for a dog with Sentinel's training. But if there's even a chance he's still trying to complete his mission, trying to tell us what really happened to Harrington, we owe it to both of them to try. There was something in Ortiz's voice when he spoke of this obligation, a personal commitment beyond professional duty, that resonated with Simmons's own values. Whatever had happened on that mission 10 years ago, it was clear that Ortiz felt a deep responsibility to uncover the truth. You said you've been waiting 10 years for someone to ask the right questions, Simmons observed. Why didn't you come forward sooner? A shadow passed across Ortiz's features. I tried, in the beginning. When the official report came back listing both Harrington and Sentinel as KIA, I knew something was wrong. I filed inquiries through official channels. I was told the matter was classified beyond my clearance level despite my role in the program. He paused, his jaw tightening. Then I was offered early retirement with full benefits. The implication was clear. You were being silenced, Simmons surmised. Diplomatically, Ortiz confirmed. There were no threats, just a clear message that further questions would not be welcomed. 6 months later, when I heard rumors about a dog matching Sentinel's description appearing at Harrington's grave, I came to see for myself. It was him, alive when official records declared him dead. That's when I knew for certain that the official story was false. Why didn't you approach Sentinel then? Rivera asked, clearly hearing this part of the story for the first time. I observed from a distance, Ortiz explained. His behavior was purposeful, patterned. He wasn't just grieving, he was performing, but approaching him directly might have compromised whatever information he was trying to preserve. Without proper authorization, without protection, I couldn't risk it. He looked directly at Rivera. So I waited, and I watched from a distance, and I kept my ear to the ground for any sign that someone else had noticed the discrepancies. The picture becoming clearer now. A trainer forced into retirement, maintaining his own vigil from afar, while his former canine charge kept watch over a grave. Both waiting for the right moment, the right people to finally recognize what they had been trying to communicate all along. How did you finally make contact with Captain Rivera? Simmons asked. I didn't, Ortiz replied. She found me. Rivera picked up the thread of the explanation. 3 months ago, as I mentioned, we received information from a confidential source suggesting that the operation resulting in Harrington's death might have involved friendly fire or even deliberate targeting. When I began investigating, Master Sergeant Ortiz's name appeared repeatedly in connection with the program and with Harrington's training. When I located him and mentioned Sentinel, he agreed to assist immediately. I've been keeping my own records, Ortiz added. Observations of Sentinel's patterns, changes in his behavior on significant dates, everything I could document from a distance. I'm hoping this, combined with direct engagement, might finally piece together what Harrington discovered that got him killed. The gravity of the situation settled over the room. What had begun as a touching story of canine loyalty had transformed into something far more complex, a decade-long silent communication from a dog trained to remember, trying to fulfill a final mission for a handler who could no longer receive the message. And now, those who might finally be able to understand had arrived. "I need to see your security measures," Simmons said, after a moment of consideration. "If what you're suggesting is accurate, if Harrington was deliberately targeted, then revealing your interest in Sentinel could potentially put others at risk. I won't have my cemetery turned into a backdrop for another incident." "Already implemented," Rivera assured him, pulling another folder from her briefcase. "We have surveillance countermeasures in place. My team is officially here conducting a routine review of military grave sites. Master Sergeant Ortiz's presence has been documented as a specialist consultant on preservation of military insignia. On older headstones, all communications regarding the true nature of our investigation are conducted through secure channels with end-to-end encryption." Simmons reviewed the security protocols with the practiced eye of someone who had spent decades in military intelligence. The measures were thorough, professionally implemented, and demonstrated that Rivera was taking the potential threats seriously. Finally satisfied, he closed the folder. "You have my authorization to proceed," he decided. "When do you want to begin?" "Immediately," Ortiz said, his gaze drifting toward the window and the distant figure of Sentinel still maintaining his post. "I've waited 10 years to understand what he's been trying to tell us. I don't want to wait a day longer." As they prepared to move their operation to the gravesite, Margaret knocked and entered with an update on cemetery activities for the day. "We have the Johnson family arriving at 11:00 for a visit to their son's grave in Section 8, she informed Simmons. "And the VFW Honor Guard will be practicing for tomorrow's memorial service near the Eastern Pavilion around 2. "Thank you, Margaret," Simmons replied. "Please inform security that Captain Rivera and her associate will be working near Section 14 today. They're to be given full access but with minimal attention, standard courtesy, no special escorts." Recognizing the director's intention to keep their presence low-key, Margaret nodded and withdrew to carry out the instructions. Once she had gone, Simmons turned back to his visitors. "I'll accompany you initially," he said. "My presence near Sentinel won't attract attention. Staff are accustomed to seeing me check on him. After that, you'll proceed on your own, but I want regular updates." Outside, the autumn air carried a crispness that hinted at the coming winter. As they walked along the paved pathways winding between sections of graves, Simmons maintained a conversational pace, describing the cemetery's features as if conducting a standard tour for visiting officials. Any observers would see nothing unusual in the cemetery director showing army officers around the grounds. "You said Sentinel appears at dawn and stays until dusk," Rivera noted as they walked. "Where does he go at night?" "We're not entirely certain," Simmons admitted. "There's a small wooded area beyond the eastern boundary. Security has observed him heading in that direction after sunset. We've located what appears to be a den he's created for himself about a quarter-mile from the property. Line, well-concealed, defensible position with multiple escape routes. Tactical selection," Ortiz murmured with clear approval. "That's his training. Even after all these years, he's maintaining operational security measures." As they approached Section 14, Simmons guided them along a route that allowed them to observe Sentinel while still maintaining some distance. The Belgian Malinois was lying in his customary position beside Harrington's headstone, his posture alert rather than relaxed, amber eyes scanning the surroundings with methodical attention. "He does this every day?" Rivera asked quietly. "Without," A fail, Simmons confirmed. Through blizzards, thunderstorms, heat waves. Nothing deters him. What's most remarkable is his timing. He arrives within minutes of dawn, regardless of the season, and departs precisely at sunset. Not just loyalty, Ortiz observed. That's programmed behavior. Timekeeping was part of his training. Specific intervals, specific patterns. They continued their circuit of the section, gradually moving closer without directly approaching. Ortiz's attention never wavered from the dog, his experienced eye noting details in posture, ear position, and gaze patterns that would be meaningless to most observers. "He's aware of us," Ortiz said softly. "See how his ear position has changed. He's tracking our movement specifically, different from how he's monitoring other visitors." Indeed, while Sentinel's body remained positioned facing the headstone, his ears, the specialized equipment, arrived in a nondescript black case, brought to the maintenance building by one of Rivera's team members, posing as a facilities inspector. Ortiz opened it carefully, revealing an array of devices that seemed to blend military precision with veterinary science. A tablet with custom software, several small sensors in sealed packages, and what appeared to be a modified collar. "Biometric monitoring system," Ortiz explained as he prepared the equipment. "It's designed to capture micro-expressions, subtle muscle movements, and physiological responses that aren't visible to the naked eye. When Sentinel communicates through his trained responses, the system helps translate the patterns into data we can analyze. Technology has advanced considerably since the program was active," Rivera added, helping to set up a secure laptop that would receive and process the incoming data. What used to require a full team of analysts with specialized training can now be accomplished with algorithmic pattern recognition. As they worked, Simmons's phone vibrated with a message from security. "The Johnson family has arrived," he informed them. "They'll be in Section 8 for approximately an hour. I should make an appearance, offer condolences. It's expected of me. When families of recently interred veterans visit, go," Rivera agreed. "We'll proceed with the initial sensor deployment, nothing that would attract attention." After Simmons departed, Ortiz and Rivera continued their preparations in focused silence. The tension between them was palpable, not adversarial, but heightened by the gravity of what they were attempting. After a decade of waiting, the window to access Sentinel's preserved memories was finally opening, and neither wanted to risk compromising this opportunity through haste or carelessness. "The reconnaissance phase is complete," Ortiz said, checking the calibration on one of the sensors. "Sentinel has recognized command protocols and confirmed operational status. Now we move to information extraction." "How confident are you in his retention?" Rivera asked, the question professional rather than doubtful. Ortiz considered this carefully. "Under normal circumstances, I would expect significant degradation after 10 years. But these aren't normal circumstances. His daily routine at the gravesite isn't random behavior. It's a continuous rehearsal of the encoded information. He's been actively preserving whatever he witnessed, like a computer running a program in an endless loop." "A limited analogy, but close enough," Ortiz acknowledged, "except the program is reinforced by emotional connection. Sentinel isn't just storing data, he's fulfilling a final promise to his handler. That motivation creates a preservation mechanism, far more powerful than we might expect from standard training maintenance. With the equipment prepared, They developed a plan for approaching Sentinel again, this time with more direct engagement. Ortiz would advance with the training marker, establish communication protocols, and gradually introduce the modified collar that contained the primary sensors. Rivera would remain at the maintenance building, monitoring incoming data and maintaining operational security. "If anyone approaches or shows unusual interest, I'll alert you immediately," she assured Ortiz, as he prepared to leave. "Remember, Sentinel's training includes perimeter awareness," he reminded her. "If he detects surveillance or potential threats, he'll abort the communication sequence. Watch for his left ear if it maintains forward position without the normal. Rotational scanning, he's detected something concerning." Rivera nodded, understanding the significance. "Proceed when ready." Ortiz moved with deliberate casualness toward Section 14, following a meandering path similar to his earlier approach, but with subtle differences to avoid establishing a pattern that might be recognized by any watching eyes. He carried a small bouquet of flowers, a common sight in the cemetery that would provide natural cover for his hands as he manipulated the training marker. Sentinel tracked his approach with the same focused attention as before, recognition evident in his posture. When Ortiz reached a predetermined distance, he knelt at a nearby grave, as if paying respects, positioning himself at an angle that allowed direct line of sight to the Belgian Malinois, while appearing to focus elsewhere. Through the observation equipment at the maintenance building, Rivera watched the interaction unfold. The initial communication sequence appeared almost magical in its subtlety. Slight movements of Ortiz's fingers, corresponding shifts in Sentinel's position, an invisible conversation conducted through micro-gestures that would appear meaningless to any casual observer. After establishing the basic protocol, Ortiz advanced to the next phase, removing the specialized collar from inside his jacket and placing it on the grave beside him, visible to Sentinel but not prominently displayed. The dog's reaction was immediate. A specific head tilt, followed by a precise placement of his right paw, then a sequence of ear movements that the monitoring system immediately began to decode. "Recognition of equipment confirmed," Rivera murmured. Into her secure communication device, tracking the data appearing on her screen. "He's acknowledging the extraction protocol." For nearly 20 minutes, this silent communication continued, Ortiz gradually introducing more complex command sequences, Sentinel responding with increasingly structured patterns of movement. To any observer, it might have appeared that a visitor was simply sitting near a grave while a dog watched from a distance. But the data streaming into the monitoring system revealed something far more extraordinary. A sophisticated information exchange following protocols established a decade earlier. Finally, Ortiz rose and approached Harrington's grave directly, kneeling beside the headstone while maintaining a respectful distance from Sentinel. The dog watched intently, but remained in position, his training preventing him from breaking his post without specific authorization. "Staff Sergeant Harrington," Ortiz spoke quietly, as if addressing the fallen soldier, "I've come to help complete the mission." The words were both sincere tribute and coded command. Upon hearing them, Sentinel's demeanor shifted subtly, a relaxation of certain muscle groups combined with heightened alertness in others. He recognized the mission continuation phrase, a protocol designed for situations where a handler might be incapacitated and command transferred to another operator. With slow, deliberate movements, Ortiz extended his hand, palm up, the training marker visible. "Transfer authorized," he said, the final element of the command sequence. Sentinel rose from his position, the first time he had done so during their observation, and approached Ortiz with measured steps. The dog's movement carried a ceremonial quality, a formality that transcended ordinary canine behavior. When he reached Ortiz, he lowered his head and allowed the man to place the specialized collar around his neck. "Secure link established," Ortiz confirmed over the communication channel to Rivera, proceeding with data extraction sequence. The collar activated silently, its embedded sensors beginning to capture the subtle physiological indicators that accompanied Sentinel's trained communication patterns. As Ortiz initiated the first extraction command, the dog responded with a series of precisely sequenced behaviors, specific head positions, ear movements, paw placements, and body orientations that followed mathematical patterns recognizable to the monitoring system. At the maintenance building, Rivera watched in growing amazement as data began flowing into the analysis program. "We're receiving structured information," she reported, "multiple pattern layers consistent with high-priority intelligence encoding." For the next 45 minutes, Ortiz guided Sentinel through a complex sequence of commands, each designed to access specific categories of information. The dog responded with unwavering focus, his trained behaviors conveying data with a precision that defied conventional understanding of canine capabilities. When the primary extraction sequence was complete, Ortiz gently removed the collar, replacing it with a standard one he had brought for this purpose. "You've done well," he told Sentinel quietly. "Mission parameters updated. Maintain position, but accept integration protocols." The command, part of the program's established language, communicated to Sentinel that his long vigil was entering a new phase. He was to continue his presence at the grave, maintaining his decade-long commitment to his handler, but would now accept regular interaction with Ortiz as part of an ongoing mission rather than an interruption of his duties. With a final signal, confirming the new parameters, Ortiz rose and returned to the maintenance building, his expression revealing the emotional weight of the interaction despite his professional demeanor. "The primary extraction is complete," he reported to Rivera as he entered. "We have the framework of whatever Sentinel has been preserving." "The data structure is unlike anything I've seen," she acknowledged, gesturing to the patterns displayed on her screen. Multiple layered sequences, some repeating, others varying according to specific mathematical intervals. The algorithm is attempting to decode it now, matching it against known communication protocols from the program. As the analysis continued, Simmons returned from his duties with the visiting family, his curiosity evident. "What have you found?" he asked, noting the intensity with which both Rivera and Ortiz were studying the incoming data. "Something extraordinary," Rivera replied without looking up from the screen. "Sentinel wasn't just maintaining a vigil all these years. He was preserving a complex intelligence package. The patterns suggest deliberately encoded information, not just impressionistic memories. Harrington trained him specifically for this," Ortiz added, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "What we're seeing here isn't standard program protocol. This is a specialized application, a fail-safe. Harrington anticipated that something might happen to him and prepared Sentinel to preserve critical information. The implications of this revelation settled over the room like a physical weight. Staff Sergeant Michael Harrington hadn't just died on a mission gone wrong. He had foreseen the possibility of his death and had taken extraordinary measures to ensure that whatever he had discovered wouldn't die with him. How long until you can decode what he's preserved? Simmons asked. The initial pattern recognition is already underway, Rivera explained. Basic elements should be translatable within hours. Full contextual analysis might take days, depending on the complexity of what Harrington encoded. As they spoke, the first decoding results began appearing on the screen. Fragmentary elements that the algorithm had matched with confidence to known program protocols. Geographic coordinates, timestamps, personnel identifiers. These are mission parameters, Ortiz confirmed, studying the emerging data. Date and location markers consistent with Harrington's final deployment. But there's something unusual about the sequence. It doesn't match the official mission briefing I was given before they deployed. Different operational zone? Rivera suggested. Not just different, completely unauthorized, Ortiz replied, his expression darkening as more data clarified. These coordinates place them over 100 kilometers from their supposed operational area, in a region that was explicitly designated as off-limits to American forces at that time. The revelation added another layer to the mystery. Not only had Harrington died under circumstances suspicious enough to warrant falsified reports, but the mission itself appeared to have deviated significantly from its authorized parameters. Could they have been redirected in the field? Simmons asked, his military background providing context for the question. Possible, but highly irregular for that type of operation, Ortiz said, especially with no official record of the redirection in after-action reports. This is beginning to look like a completely unauthorized action, something off the books. As more data emerged from the algorithm's analysis, a clearer picture began to form. Personnel identifiers appeared, matching to specific individuals who had been present on the mission. Operational timestamps indicated movements and actions that directly contradicted the official timeline. This is enough to justify a full investigation, Rivera noted, her professional demeanor not quite masking her growing alarm at what they were discovering. Even without the complete decoding, we have clear evidence of falsified mission reports. Gets worse, Ortiz said grimly, pointing to a new pattern emerging in the data. These are weapon signatures that Sentinel was trained to identify. American weapons, but not standard issue for Harrington's unit. These signatures match executive action protocols. Executive action, Simmons repeated, the euphemism's meaning clear from his intelligence background. You're suggesting that Harrington and his team encountered American operators conducting an unauthorized elimination, Ortiz finished, the words hanging heavily in the air. And then Harrington himself became a target to ensure his silence. The full implications of what they were uncovering began to crystallize. Not just a mission gone wrong, not just falsified reports to cover embarrassing failures, but something far darker. American forces potentially engaged in unauthorized operations, then silencing witnesses from within their own ranks. We need to secure this data immediately, Rivera decided, her training asserting itself through the shock. And we need to establish a secure extraction for Sentinel. If this information is accurate, then anyone connected to the original operation would have powerful motivation to ensure it never comes to light. Agreed, Ortiz said. I recommend we transfer both the data and Sentinel to a secured facility as soon as possible. His continued presence here, now that we've engaged with him, creates vulnerability. Simmons considered this recommendation, weighing his responsibility to the cemetery against the emerging reality of the situation. You believe Sentinel could be in danger? I believe everyone connected to this information could be, Ortiz replied frankly. Harrington was killed to ensure his silence. Sentinel was reported as killed in action despite being very much alive. I was forced into retirement when I asked questions. The pattern suggests a comprehensive effort to bury whatever happened. On that mission, an effort that would likely extend to eliminating new threats to that concealment. The sobering assessment brought a new urgency to their actions. While the algorithm continued its work decoding the more complex elements of Sentinel's preserved information, they developed a plan for secure extraction of both the dog and the data they had already collected. I have a secure facility prepared, Rivera informed them. Originally intended for documentation review, but it can be adapted for housing Sentinel as well. We'll need to move after dark, when cemetery visitors are gone. Sentinel won't leave willingly, Simmons pointed out, not after maintaining his vigil for 10 years. He can update his mission parameters, Ortiz assured him. With the proper command sequences, he'll understand that relocating is part of completing his objective, not abandoning it. As they finalized the extraction plan, the data analysis continued, revealing new elements of what Sentinel had preserved. Geographical features from the unauthorized operational zone. Identification markers for individuals not listed in any official. Mission documentation. Timing sequences that mapped movements with precision only possible through direct observation. He was recording everything, Ortiz realized, watching the patterns emerge. Harrington had him documenting the entire mission in real time, creating a record that couldn't be erased or altered. A living black box, Rivera murmured, the aviation term seeming aptly applied to the canine intelligence asset. As evening approached, they prepared for the extraction. The cemetery would close to visitors at sunset, providing a window of opportunity to remove Sentinel with minimal observation. Rivera coordinated with her security team, establishing counter-surveillance measures and secure transport protocols. Ortiz prepared the specialized equipment that would be needed to maintain Sentinel's cooperation during the transfer. Simmons, watching these preparations with growing concern, felt the weight of his responsibility to both the cemetery and the truth that was emerging. "I've watched that dog maintain his post for a decade," he said finally. "Never understood why he was so dedicated, why nothing could draw him away. Now it turns out he wasn't just grieving, he was completing his final mission. The bond between handler and military working dog transcends ordinary understanding," Ortiz replied. But in this case, it was more than just loyalty. Harrington knew something was wrong. He anticipated that he might not survive to report it, so he used the one asset he had that couldn't be compromised, a dog trained to remember and communicate. Complex information, a partner whose loyalty couldn't be bought or threatened. As darkness began to fall across the cemetery, Sentinel remained at his post beside Harrington's grave, maintaining the same vigilant attention he had shown every day for 10 years. But now, for the first time since his handler's death, the information he had been preserving was finally being received. The mission Harrington had entrusted to him was entering its final phase. "It's time," Rivera announced, checking her secure communications one last time. "The perimeter is clear. Transport is in position at the east service entrance. We move in 15 minutes. Ortiz nodded, gathering the equipment he would need for Sentinel's extraction. "I'll approach alone first," he decided. "Establish the command sequence for relocation. Once he acknowledges the new parameters, we can proceed with the transfer." "To the vehicle," "I'm coming with you," Simmons said, his tone making clear this wasn't a request, but a statement of intention. "That dog has been under my protection for 10 years. I won't have him removed without my presence." After a moment's consideration, Rivera nodded agreement. "Your presence might actually help maintain operational security. Anyone observing would see the cemetery director, which presents as routine supervision. The plan established, they moved out into the gathering darkness. The cemetery took on a different character after sunset, the perfectly aligned white markers catching the last fading light, creating patterns of light and shadow across the gently rolling landscape. Security lighting provided minimal illumination along the main pathways, but the areas between grave sections remained in deeper shadow. As they approached Section 14, Sentinel's silhouette became visible beside Harrington's headstone, his posture as attentive as ever despite the falling darkness. When he detected their approach, his ears swiveled toward them, tracking their movement with the same tactical awareness he had displayed earlier. Ortiz advanced alone, activating the training marker with a subtle pressure that released its distinctive scent profile, a signal that would be detectable to Sentinel's enhanced olfactory sensitivity even in the dim light. The dog's response was immediate, his attention focusing fully on Ortiz as he recognized the command initialization sequence. "Mission parameters update," Ortiz stated clearly, using the formal language established in the program. "Final phase. Activation. Secure relocation required for mission completion." He accompanied these verbal commands with the precise hand signals and body positioning that formed the complete communication protocol. Sentinel watched with unwavering attention, processing the command sequence with the precision that had made him exceptional even among program-trained dogs. For a long moment after Ortiz completed the sequence, Sentinel remained motionless beside the headstone. Then, with deliberate movements that carried a sense of ceremonial significance, he touched his nose to the white marble marker, a gesture that appeared almost like a farewell, or perhaps a promise to return. "He's acknowledging the updated parameters," Ortiz explained quietly to Simmons and Rivera, who had remained a respectful distance behind. "And he's marking completion of the vigil phase of his mission." Finally, Sentinel moved away from the grave. That had been his post for a decade, approaching Ortiz with the focused attention of an operator receiving critical mission instructions. When he reached the trainer, he sat at attention, awaiting the next command in the sequence. "Secure transport protocols activated," Ortiz continued, fitting the specialized collar around Sentinel's neck. "Maintain tactical silence until secure zone confirmation." The collar, containing both tracking technology and the specialized sensors, needed for continued data extraction, secured smoothly around the dog's neck. With the physical connection established, Ortiz gave a hand signal indicating movement toward the extraction point. "He'll follow now," he informed the others. "Let's proceed to the vehicle with standard spacing. Appear casual, but maintain awareness." As they walked back toward the cemetery's eastern service entrance where the transport waited, Sentinel moved alongside Ortiz with perfect discipline, alert but calm, his training asserting itself through years of separation. To any observer, it might have appeared that the cemetery director and a visitor were simply escorting a well-trained dog through the grounds after hours, nothing to warrant special attention. But as they passed the administration building, something changed in Sentinel's demeanor. His ears shifted to maximum alert position, and his pace slowed almost imperceptibly. Ortiz, attuned to these subtle signals through years of training, immediately recognized the warning. "Something's wrong," he murmured, maintaining his outward casualness while scanning their surroundings. "He's detecting a presence that concerns him." Rivera, her own tactical training engaging, created a natural moment to pause and appear to be discussing cemetery features while conducting her own security assessment. "East perimeter should be clear," she said quietly. "My team confirmed no unusual activity 5 minutes ago." "It's not the perimeter," Ortiz replied, noting Sentinel's focus direction. "He's alerting to something inside the cemetery grounds, possibly near the maintenance building we were using." Simmons, drawing on decades of military experience, made a show of checking his phone while using the movement to observe the area in question. "Movement near the south corner," he confirmed. "Single individual, deliberately using shadow patterns for concealment." The situation had suddenly transformed from a secure extraction to potential compromise. If someone had identified their interest in Sentinel and connected it to Harrington's decade-old mission, the information they had extracted could be at risk, and potentially their lives as well. "Change of plan," Rivera decided instantly. "We divide. Director Simmons, you continue with Master Sergeant Ortiz and Sentinel to the extraction vehicle. I'll create a diversion to determine who's watching and why." "Too risky," Ortiz countered. "If they're connected to the original operation, they won't hesitate to use lethal force to maintain secrecy." "That's why I need to identify the threat level," Rivera insisted. "We can't extract to a secure facility if we're being tracked. I'll remain in public view. Nothing suspicious. Just a routine security check that draws attention while you complete the primary extraction." After a moment's consideration, Ortiz nodded agreement. The protection of both Sentinel and the intelligence he had preserved took priority. Rivera's tactical assessment was sound. They needed to identify the potential threat without compromising. "The extraction. Proceed with caution," he advised. "If you confirm hostile intent, disengage immediately. We'll establish secure communication through the backup channel once Sentinel is at the facility." With the revised plan established, they separated. Rivera moving with purposeful strides toward the administration building as if responding to a routine matter, while Ortiz, Simmons, and Sentinel continued toward the extraction point with measured pace to avoid drawing attention. As they approached the Eastern Service entrance, the transport vehicle came into view, an unmarked van with government plates, positioned with its rear doors facing away from the main cemetery grounds to allow discreet loading. 2 agents in civilian clothes stood nearby, their casual postures belied by their alert observation of the surrounding area. "Director Simmons with priority asset," Ortiz identified as they approached, using the predetermined recognition phrase. The agents nodded acknowledgement, one moving to open the van's rear doors while the other maintained perimeter awareness. Inside the vehicle, specialized transport equipment had been prepared. Secure mounting points for the data systems, comfortable but tactically sound containment for Sentinel during transit. "Load rapidly but without appearance of urgency," the lead agent advised, his voice low. "We've detected unusual communications activity in the vicinity, possible compromise of operational security." This confirmation of potential surveillance added urgency to their actions, while reinforcing the need to maintain the appearance of routine activity. Ortiz guided Sentinel into the vehicle with practiced efficiency, securing him in the specialized transport harness, while Simmons provided visual cover from potential observation points. "What about Captain Rivera?" Simmons asked, as the loading was completed. "Secondary extraction protocol," the agent replied. "Separate vehicle, different exit point, scheduled 30 minutes after our departure, standard counter-surveillance measures." As they prepared to depart, Simmons found himself facing an unexpected decision. His duty was to the cemetery, to remain on site and ensure operations continued normally to avoid drawing attention to the unusual activities of the evening. Yet he felt a powerful responsibility to Sentinel, the dog who had maintained his extraordinary vigil on these grounds for a decade, whose loyalty to both his handler and his mission had never wavered despite isolation and the passage of years. "Dunsi, we're coming with you," he informed Ortiz, his decision made. "That dog has been under my protection for 10 years. I won't abandon him now that he's finally completing his mission." Ortiz studied him for a moment, then nodded. "We could use your insight." "At the secure facility," he acknowledged. "Your observations of Sentinel's patterns over the years might help contextualize what we're extracting from his preserved memories." With the decision made, Simmons sent a brief, carefully worded message to his deputy director, citing an emergency, requiring his presence with military investigators through the night. Then he climbed into the vehicle beside Sentinel, who acknowledged his familiar presence with a brief glance before returning his attention to Ortiz, clearly recognizing the trainer as his current handler. As the van's doors closed and the vehicle began moving toward the service exit, Simmons found himself reflecting on the extraordinary revelation of the day. For 10 years, he had watched Sentinel maintain his vigil, admiring the dog's dedication while never suspecting the true purpose behind his unwavering presence. What had appeared to be grief-driven loyalty had been something far more complex. A highly trained military asset, completing the final mission entrusted to him by his handler, preserving critical information that powerful interests had sought to bury. Now, as they moved toward the secure facility where the full scope of that information would finally be revealed, Simmons couldn't help but wonder what other secrets might lie hidden beneath the surface of everyday events, and what other acts of extraordinary loyalty might be unfolding unrecognized before oblivious eyes. The secure facility was located on the outskirts of a military reservation, camouflaged as an agricultural research station. As the unmarked van passed through multiple security checkpoints, each more rigorous than the last, Simmons noted the thoroughness of the protocols: facial recognition, vehicle undercarriage scans, and what appeared to be scent detection equipment that would identify explosive residues or chemical agents. Sentinel remained calm throughout the journey, his training evident in his composed demeanor despite the unfamiliar surroundings. He maintained a vigilant watch from his secured position in the vehicle, amber eyes tracking movements outside the windows with tactical awareness that seemed extraordinary even for a military working dog. "He's still in operational mode," Ortiz explained, noting Simmons's observation of the dog's behavior. "The extraction protocols we initiated have shifted his memory patterns from preservation to active communication. Essentially, we've reactivated his training matrix." After clearing the final checkpoint, the van proceeded down a gravel road toward a cluster of metal buildings that resembled storage facilities for agricultural equipment. Only when they parked beside the largest structure did the sophisticated nature of the installation become apparent, discrete security cameras with advanced motion tracking, personnel with a deliberately casual stance of trained operators, and entry systems requiring multiple authentication factors. "Welcome to Site Echo," the security lead greeted them as they exited the vehicle. "Captain Rivera called ahead. We have the main analysis lab prepared for immediate use." Inside, the facility's agricultural facade gave way to state-of-the-art technology. The main room contained an array of specialized equipment focused around a central workspace designed for both human analysts and the comfortable accommodation of a canine subject. Advanced monitoring systems lined the walls, while a separate section housed what appeared to be medical equipment adapted for veterinary applications. "The data we extracted at the cemetery has already been uploaded to the secure server," Ortiz informed Simmons as they settled Sentinel into the specialized workspace. "The algorithm will continue pattern matching overnight, with human analysts reviewing the preliminary results as they emerge." A veterinarian with military credentials conducted a brief examination of Sentinel, confirming his overall health while taking blood samples for analysis. "Remarkable condition for his age," she noted, scanning the microchip in his shoulder to verify his identity against military records. "Especially considering he's been essentially living wild for a decade." "Not wild," Simmons corrected, feeling a strange protectiveness toward the dog who had been such a constant presence at his cemetery. "He's been living with purpose. The cemetery staff ensured he had shelter and fresh water, though he refused more direct care." The veterinarian nodded, acknowledgement of the distinction. "Well, he's showing no signs of malnutrition or exposure damage. His muscle tone is excellent, cognitive responses are sharp, and initial blood work suggests no chronic health concerns. Whatever regimen he maintained at the cemetery clearly served him well." As the examination concluded, Captain Rivera arrived. From her separate extraction route, her expression revealing both tension and satisfaction. "Perimeter at the cemetery was compromised," she reported immediately. "My counter-surveillance identified 2 individuals conducting systematic observation of Section 14, military precision, communication discipline, suggesting professional training." "Identification?" Ortiz asked, his attention sharpening. "Negative. They maintained position outside direct visual range, utilizing long-distance observation equipment. When I initiated investigative movement in their direction, they executed a textbook withdrawal. No panic, no rushed movements, just systematic repositioning to maintain their surveillance capability without risking exposure. The implications were immediate and concerning. Someone had identified their interest in Sentinel and had mobilized trained observers within hours. The information they were extracting from the dog's preserved memories clearly remained sensitive enough to warrant active surveillance a decade after the events in question. "We need to accelerate the decoding," Ortiz decided. "If they've identified our interest in Harrington's mission, they'll be implementing countermeasures to contain whatever information might emerge." Rivera nodded agreement. "I've already authorized priority processing and added a counterintelligence team to identify potential source of the surveillance. For now, we're secure at this location. The extraction was clean, and our operational security protocols should prevent tracking." As they spoke, the first substantial decoding results began appearing on the main analysis screen. The algorithm had processed enough of Sentinel's preserved behaviors to begin reconstructing coherent elements of the intelligence he had been maintaining. Multiple data markers confirmed, announced the lead analyst, a civilian specialist with intelligence community credentials. We're seeing clear geographical references, personnel identifiers, and temporal markers consistent with a systematic intelligence gathering operation. This isn't random observation, this is structured documentation of specific events. The screen displayed a topographical map of a mountainous region, coordinates placing it in a remote area of Afghanistan near the Pakistani border. Identified on the map were movement patterns, timing sequences, and location markers that corresponded to specific military operations. This matches what we began to see at the cemetery, Ortiz confirmed, studying the emerging data. But the operational zone is completely inconsistent with Harrington's official mission parameters. His unit was supposed to be conducting routine patrol and community engagement over 100 kilometers from this region. There's more, the analyst continued, highlighting additional data points emerging from the algorithm's processing. Personnel identifiers showing presence of individuals not listed in any mission documentation for that period. Specifically, these signature patterns indicate Delta Force operators in a region where they had no authorized deployment at that time. The revelation added another layer to the mystery. Delta Force, the elite Special Operations Unit officially designated as 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, operated under the highest levels of classification, often on missions that existed entirely outside standard military command structures. Can we identify specific individuals? Rivera asked, her professional demeanor not quite masking her growing concern at the implications. The patterns suggest Sentinel was tracking 8 Delta operators individually identified through the behavioral encoding Harrington established, the analyst explained. We're cross-referencing against known deployment records, but given the classification level of Delta operations, confirmation may be difficult. As they absorbed this information, Simmons found himself reconsidering everything he had understood about Harrington's death and Sentinel's decade-long vigil. What had initially appeared to be a touching story of canine loyalty had transformed into something far more complex. A silent witness preserving evidence of covert operations, that powerful. Interests had worked to conceal. What about weapon signatures? Ortiz asked, returning to the concerning pattern they had begun to identify at the cemetery. Can you confirm the executive action protocols we were seeing in the preliminary data? The analyst adjusted the display, bringing forward another data set extracted from Sentinel's encoded behaviors. Confirmed, he said grimly. The dog was trained to recognize and document specific weapons configurations. What we're seeing here matches specialized equipment used exclusively for targeted elimination operations, not standard military engagement. They were conducting an assassination, Rivera concluded, giving voice to what the data was increasingly suggesting. An unauthorized operation in direct violation of standing orders for that region at that time. And Harrington's team stumbled upon it, Ortiz added, the pieces fitting together with disturbing clarity, which made them witnesses to an operation that officially never existed. The implications were staggering. If accurate, the information Sentinel had preserved suggested that American Special Operations Forces had conducted an unauthorized assassination in a region explicitly designated as off-limits to such operations, potentially creating significant diplomatic and strategic complications. When Harrington and his team had inadvertently witnessed this operation, they themselves had become a security risk to be eliminated. "There's something else emerging in the pattern recognition," the analyst noted, highlighting a new data set forming on the screen. "The algorithm is detecting a distinct sequence that doesn't match standard operational documentation. It appears to be communication content, specific exchanges between individuals that Sentinel was trained to preserve." Verbatim, this represented an extraordinary feat of canine intelligence and training, the preservation not just of events and identifiers, but of actual verbal exchanges, encoded through the specialized communication system Harrington had established with his partner. As the algorithm continued processing, fragments of these preserved communications began appearing on screen. "Confirm target elimination. Package secured. Unexpected witnesses. Full team of contain the situation. Zero footprint protocol. Cannot afford exposure. Directorate authorization code." He was recording their communications, Rivera realized, the implication dawning with chilling clarity. Harrington had trained Sentinel to document not just movements and identifiers, but actual verbal exchanges between the Delta operators. And they realized it, Ortiz added grimly. When they identified Harrington as a dog handler with a specially trained canine asset, they would have recognized the security risk immediately. Military working dogs with advanced training would have been a known factor to Delta operators. The picture becoming clearer with each new data point. Harrington's team, conducting routine operations in their assigned zone, had somehow deviated from their planned route and encountered a highly classified Delta operation in a restricted area. Recognizing the security implications, the Delta team had implemented containment protocols, eliminating witnesses to maintain operational security. But they had miscalculated one critical factor. Harrington had already instructed Sentinel to document everything, and the dog had survived to preserve that documentation. "We need to bring in higher authorities," Rivera decided, the professional operator in her, recognizing when a situation exceeded standard protocols. This level of potential misconduct requires direct oversight from the Inspector General's office, possibly congressional intelligence committees. "Not yet," Ortiz cautioned. "We need the complete picture first. Partial information taken to higher authorities could be easily dismissed or contained. Remember, whoever orchestrated the original cover-up had enough influence to falsify mission. Reports declare Sentinel KIA despite his survival and force my early retirement when I asked questions. We're dealing with individuals who have significant institutional power." Before Rivera could respond, the secure communication system activated with an incoming priority message. The facility security chief answered, his expression growing increasingly concerned as he listened. "We have a situation," he reported after ending the call. "Cemetery security reports individuals breached the perimeter approximately 30 minutes after our departure. They accessed the maintenance building where we conducted the initial data extraction and swept the area with specialized equipment. Appears to be a professional forensic team looking for intelligence signatures. The breach confirmed their worst. Veers, whoever had orchestrated the original cover-up, had identified their interest in Sentinel and was actively working to contain potential exposure. The decade-old operation that had resulted in Harrington's death remained sensitive enough to warrant immediate counterintelligence measures. "They're trailing behind us," Rivera noted, her tactical assessment immediate. "But the timeline suggests They're operating with significant resources and authority. Standard protocol escalation wouldn't mobilize a forensic team that quickly without prior authorization, which means they were already on standby, Ortiz concluded. They've been monitoring Sentinel all along, perhaps even aware of my periodic observations over the years. When we initiated active contact, it triggered their contingency protocols. This realization added urgency to their work. The information Sentinel had preserved wasn't just historically significant. It represented an active security concern to powerful interests who had already demonstrated willingness to eliminate witnesses. We need to complete the full extraction as quickly as possible, Rivera decided, and we need to establish secure documentation protocols to ensure the information can't be contained if something happens to this facility or to us. The implications of her statement hung heavily in the air. They were potentially exposing a covert operation that had resulted in American casualties from friendly fire, deliberately covered up at the highest levels. The individuals responsible would have strong motivation to ensure that information never reached proper authorities. Director Simmons, Rivera continued, turning to the cemetery administrator who'd been listening with growing concern. You're a witness to Sentinel's presence and behavior over the past decade. Your testimony could be crucial to establishing the credibility of what we're uncovering. Simmons nodded, understanding the responsibility that had been unexpectedly thrust upon him. What had begun as a touching story of canine devotion at his cemetery had evolved into potential evidence of serious military misconduct. Whatever I can do to help establish the truth, he agreed. That dog has maintained his vigil for 10 years. The least I can do is help ensure his mission is completed. As they spoke, the algorithm continued its work, extracting more detailed information from the behavioral patterns documented during their interaction with Sentinel. A more complete picture of the events a decade earlier began to emerge. With disturbing clarity, Harrington's team had been conducting routine patrol operations in their assigned sector when they had received revised orders directing them to a different zone, orders that bypassed standard command protocols but appeared to originate from legitimate authority. Following these orders, they had moved into the restricted region where they encountered the Delta Force team conducting what appeared to be a capture-or-kill operation against a high-value target. Upon recognizing that Harrington's team had witnessed their unauthorized operation, the Delta operators had implemented containment protocols, eliminating potential witnesses and staging the encounter to appear as an insurgent ambush. But Harrington, perhaps suspecting betrayal as the situation unfolded, had activated Sentinel's documentation protocols, directing the dog to preserve everything he was witnessing. In the resulting confrontation, most of Harrington's team had been killed, with the deaths attributed to enemy action. Sentinel had been presumed killed as well, allowing him to escape the scene and eventually make his way to Harrington's grave, where he had maintained his vigil, preserving the truth his handler had sacrificed himself to document. The pattern includes recognition markers for specific individuals, the analyst reported, highlighting new data emerging from the algorithm's processing. Sentinel was trained to identify and document command authority figures. These signatures correspond to senior officers outside the direct operational chain. The identification raised the stakes significantly. If accurate, it suggested authorization for the unauthorized operation had come from high-ranking officers outside standard command structures. potentially indicating a covert action program operating without proper oversight or authorization. Can we confirm specific identities? Rivera asked, the implications clear in her tone. Working on cross-reference now, the analyst replied, but these behavioral markers are highly specific. Sentinel was trained to document distinctive movement patterns, vocal characteristics, and command presence indicators unique to individual officers. As they awaited this critical identification, Ortiz turned his attention back to Sentinel, who had been resting calmly in the specialized workspace, periodically scanning the room with the tactical awareness that had become his constant state. The dog's unwavering focus throughout the decade spoke to both his exceptional training and his profound bond with Harrington, a partnership that had transcended death to preserve truth that powerful interests had sought to bury. He needs to make direct connection with what we're extracting, Ortiz decided. The full memory patterns may not be accessible through the data we've already collected. We need to engage him directly with the emerging information. This represented a sophisticated application of the enhanced canine intelligence programs, protocols, using extracted information to stimulate further memory access, essentially allowing Sentinel to recognize that his communication was being understood and encouraging more complete disclosure. With the specialized equipment prepared, Ortiz engaged Sentinel in another communication sequence, this time incorporating elements of the information they had already decoded. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The dog's posture shifted to heightened alertness, his behavioral responses becoming more specific and detailed as he recognized that his preserved memories were being accurately received. He's confirming the patterns, the analyst noted, watching the data flow into the monitoring system. And he's providing additional detail layers, refining the information based on recognition that the primary patterns have been correctly interpreted. This sophisticated feedback loop, the dog recognizing accurate interpretation of his communications and responding with more detailed information, demonstrated capabilities far beyond conventional understanding of canine intelligence. Sentinel wasn't just recalling trained responses, he was actively participating in a complex information exchange, updating his communication based on feedback. For the next hour, this extraordinary interaction continued, Ortiz guiding Sentinel. Through increasingly specific communication protocols, the dog responding with precisely structured behaviors that conveyed data with remarkable fidelity, and the analysis system converting these behaviors into actionable intelligence about events. A decade in the past, the logic was sound, if concerning in its implications. Rivera was volunteering to place herself between them and whatever forces had been mobilized to contain the information they had uncovered, a potentially dangerous position if those forces were operating with authorization to preserve secrecy at all costs. 30 minutes, she continued. That's what I need to buy you. After that, I implement secondary extraction protocols and rendezvous at the fallback location. With options limited and time running short, Ortiz accepted the plan. Gathering the core data storage devices and securing Sentinel in a specialized transport harness, he led the way toward a concealed exit at the rear of the facility, an emergency evacuation route designed for precisely such contingencies. Simmons followed, still processing the extraordinary transformation of his role from cemetery administrator to crucial witness in what appeared to be a high-stakes intelligence operation with potential national security implications. The dog he had watched maintain his faithful vigil for a decade was now revealed as something far more significant. A living record of events powerful interests had worked to conceal. His loyalty not just to a fallen handler, but to the truth. Harrington had sacrificed himself to preserve. As they moved through the concealed exit into the gathering darkness outside, Simmons glanced back at the facility where Rivera was preparing to delay the approaching forces. The dangers were real and immediate, but so was the importance of what they had uncovered. Sentinel had maintained his mission for 10 years, waiting for someone to finally recognize and receive the truth he had been preserving. Now that mission was entering its final and most critical phase, ensuring that truth reached those with the authority and integrity to act upon it. Whatever happened in the coming hours and days, one thing was certain: the extraordinary story of a military working dog's decade-long vigil at his handler's grave had been revealed as something far more profound than simple canine loyalty. It was a testament to a partnership that had transcended death to preserve truth against powerful efforts to bury it, a mission that, after 10 long years, was finally nearing completion. The emergency extraction vehicle, a modified SUV with specialized communications equipment and tactical capabilities, disguised beneath civilian appearance, moved swiftly through the darkness. Ortiz drove with the focused precision of someone accustomed to high-pressure situations, his hands steady on the wheel despite the gravity of their circumstances. Beside him, Simmons maintained vigilant watch on their surroundings, decades of military training reasserting itself despite years in civilian administration. In the specially modified rear compartment, Sentinel remained calm and alert, secured in a specialized harness that allowed him both comfort and tactical mobility if needed. The dog's extraordinary composure, maintaining operational focus despite the dramatic changes in his environment after 10 years of solitary vigil, spoke to both his exceptional training and the depth of his commitment to the mission Harrington had entrusted to him. "Where are we heading?" Simmons asked as they turned onto a secondary highway, moving away from the military reservation where containment forces had nearly intercepted them. "Secure fallback location approximately 60 miles northeast," Ortiz replied, his attention divided between driving and monitoring the specialized communications equipment tracking potential pursuit. Former NSA listening post, decommissioned officially but maintained as emergency facility for sensitive operations. Captain Rivera established access protocols before we departed. As more complete information emerged, the security implications became increasingly concerning. The unauthorized operation Harrington had witnessed appeared to be part of a broader covert program operating outside standard military command structures, potentially violating both U.S. law and international agreements governing military operations in the region. "We have confirmation on command authority identification," the analyst announced, the system having finally matched Sentinel's behavioral markers to specific individuals. The names that appeared on the screen sent a chill through the room. Senior officers who had risen to the highest levels of military leadership in the decade since the operation, one now serving on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. "This explains the aggressive containment response," Rivera observed, her voice tight with controlled anger. "They're not just protecting a decade-old unauthorized operation, they're protecting current leadership positions that would be compromised if this information came to light." The full implications were staggering. Officers who had authorized an illegal operation resulting in friendly fire casualties had not only escaped accountability, but had risen to positions of significant military authority, potentially influencing policy and operations at the highest levels. We need to implement maximum security protocols immediately, Rivera decided, her training asserting itself through the shock of the revelation. Secure data backups with distributed storage, sworn depositions from all witnesses, and direct communication with the Inspector General's office, bypassing standard channels. As they began implementing these measures, the facility's perimeter security system activated with an alert. Vehicles approaching the access road, credentials identifying them as military police from the adjacent reservation. "We have incoming," the security chief reported. 3 vehicles, 8 personnel minimum. They're presenting legitimate credentials, but with non-standard authorization codes. "Containment team," Ortiz concluded grimly. "They've tracked us despite the security measures. Someone with significant authority has mobilized a response team with official cover." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. They had uncovered information that implicated high-ranking military officers in serious misconduct, and those same individuals appeared to have mobilized resources to contain that information before it could reach proper authorities. "Sentinel needs to be moved immediately," Rivera ordered. "Priority extraction with the core data. Director Simmons, you'll accompany them as civilian witness to maintain chain of custody." As the security team began rapid preparations for this emergency extraction, Simmons found himself marveling at the extraordinary circumstances that had unfolded from what had initially appeared to be a simple story of canine loyalty. The dog, who had maintained his solitary vigil at a soldier's grave for a decade, was now at the center of a high-stakes intelligence operation with potential implications for military leadership at the highest levels. "Where will you take him?" Simmons asked as Ortiz prepared Sentinel for transport. "Secure location with direct access to Inspector General oversight," Rivera explained. "We need to break the chain of command that could allow containment orders to propagate. This information needs to reach authorities outside the influence of those implicated." As they spoke, the approaching vehicles reached the first security checkpoint. Through the monitoring system, they could see the interaction. Military police, presenting credentials, security personnel, implementing verification protocols. The delay would be minimal. They had minutes at most before the facility would be breached. "Go now," Rivera instructed, her decision immediate and final. "Take the emergency exit route. I'll remain to delay them with procedural requirements and documentation verification." "Too dangerous," Ortiz objected. "If they're operating with containment authorization, they won't be constrained by standard protocols." "That's precisely why I need to be here," Rivera countered. "As a captain with special investigations, I have sufficient authority to demand proper documentation and adherence to procedural requirements. That creates the delay you need to get Sentinel and the core data to secure oversight." The implications were clear. Rivera had anticipated potential compromise of their primary facility and had prepared contingency measures. Her decision to remain behind to delay the approaching containment team now appeared to have been part of a carefully considered operational plan rather than a spontaneous sacrifice. "Will she be able to extract safely?" Simmons asked, concerned for the captain, who had placed herself between them and the forces attempting to contain the information they had uncovered. "Rivera is highly trained in counterintelligence operations," Ortiz assured him, though his tone couldn't entirely mask his own concern. Her position as a Special Investigations Officer gives her legitimate authority to question irregular containment orders and demand proper documentation. That creates procedural delays while establishing an official record of whoever is directing the containment effort. As they continued through the night, Simmons found himself reflecting on the extraordinary sequence of events that had led to this moment. What had begun as a touching story of canine devotion at his cemetery had evolved into something far more complex, a decade-long mission to preserve evidence of serious military misconduct, with potential implications reaching to the highest levels of command authority. "How did Harrington know?" he asked after a period of silence. "To prepare Sentinel this way, to anticipate that something might happen to him, he must have suspected something before the mission even began." Ortiz considered this question carefully, his expression suggesting he had been pondering the same issue. "The behavioral patterns we've extracted suggest Harrington implemented specialized documentation protocols before his team received the unauthorized redirection orders. That indicates prior concern, possibly based on intelligence he had gathered through other channels. He was setting up insurance, Simmons realized, using Sentinel as a failsafe in case something went wrong. Harrington was exceptionally intuitive about operational security issues, Ortiz confirmed. Before deploying with the Enhanced Canine Intelligence Program, he served in military intelligence with a focus on internal threat assessment. If he detected irregularities in command protocols or unusual patterns in operational directives, he would have been sensitive to potential compromises. This added another dimension to the unfolding story. Harrington hadn't just been a handler caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, but a trained intelligence officer who had recognized warning signs and taken extraordinary measures to ensure that whatever happened would be documented beyond the reach of those who might seek to bury the truth. After nearly an hour of driving, they turned onto a gravel road that wound through dense forest, eventually approaching what appeared to be an abandoned communications facility. A chain-link fence surrounding several metal buildings and a large satellite dish that had been partially dismantled to suggest decommissioning. "Perimeter security is still active despite appearances," Ortiz explained as they approached a gate that looked rusted and neglected. "Passive scanning systems are identifying vehicle and occupants now." True to his assessment, the gate began, opening automatically as they approached, suggesting sophisticated recognition systems beneath the facade of abandonment. They proceeded to the main building, a utilitarian structure with few windows and reinforced construction disguised by cosmetic deterioration to deter casual interest. Inside, the contrast was immediate and stark. Beyond the weathered exterior entrance lay a fully operational facility with advanced technology, communication systems, data processing equipment, and tactical support infrastructure maintained in a state of operational readiness despite the outward appearance of abandonment. A single operator, a woman in civilian clothes, whose bearing immediately identified her as military, greeted them as they entered. "System is prepped for data transfer," she informed them without preamble. "Captain Rivera's preliminary package arrived via secure burst transmission 20 minutes ago. Containment parameters at primary facility have been established." "Status of the captain?" Ortiz asked immediately. "Implementing secondary extraction protocols according to scheduled timeline," the operator reported. "Last communication indicated successful delay of containment team through official documentation requirements." and clearance verification procedures. This confirmation that Rivera was executing her planned extraction brought visible relief to Ortiz, though his operational focus never wavered. With practiced efficiency, he established Sentinel in a designated workspace equipped with the same specialized monitoring systems they had used at the primary facility, then began transferring the core data they had already extracted to the secure servers. Once we've transferred the primary data package, we'll resume direct extraction from Sentinel, he explained to Simmons as they worked. The algorithms will continue processing what we've already collected while we attempt to access deeper memory patterns through direct engagement. Simmons, observing the sophisticated technology and predetermined protocols, realized that their situation, while urgent, was not improvised. You and Rivera had anticipated this scenario, he noted. The compromised facility, the need for emergency extraction. You had contingencies already established. Ortiz nodded, his expression grim. When we began investigating Harrington's death and Sentinel's survival, we recognized immediately that we were potentially challenging powerful interests with significant resources. Standard operational security required establishing multiple fallback protocols and secure communication channels outside conventional military networks. You didn't trust the chain of command, Simmons observed, the implication clear given what they had been uncovering. We couldn't afford to, Ortiz confirmed, not when our preliminary findings suggested involvement of senior officers who would have direct authority over any official investigation. Rivera established this network of secure facilities and trusted personnel operating outside standard protocols. Individuals with concerns similar to ours about potential abuses of classified operations. As they established operational security at the fallback facility, the data they had extracted continued processing through the specialized algorithms designed to interpret Sentinel's preserved behavioral patterns. New information emerged with disturbing clarity. Detailed documentation of the unauthorized operation Harrington had witnessed, including specific identification of both the Delta operators involved and their high-value target. This changes the entire understanding of regional operations during that period, the analyst noted as the pattern recognition solidified. The target they eliminated wasn't on any authorized list for that time frame. In fact, he appears to have been explicitly designated as a potential diplomatic asset by State Department protocols. The revelation added another layer of concern to what they were uncovering. Not just an unauthorized operation in a restricted zone, but one targeting an individual who had been identified by diplomatic channels as having potential value for regional stabilization efforts, potentially undermining official foreign policy directives while creating the appearance of insurgent activity. Check cross-reference with financial tracking patterns, Ortiz instructed, his focus sharpening as a new possibility emerged. Sentinel was trained to recognize and document resource transfers as potential indicators of corruption or compromise. The analyst adjusted parameters, bringing forward another dataset extracted from the dog's preserved behavior patterns. What emerged sent a chill through the room. Documentation of substantial resource transfers corresponding to the elimination operation, not through official military channels, but through private contractors with connections to specific resource development interests in the region. They weren't conducting a counter-terrorism operation, Simmons realized, the implications becoming clear as he studied the emerging data. This was a private elimination contract disguised as military action targeting someone who threatened commercial interests rather than security concerns, using Delta operators as contracted assets, Ortiz confirmed, the anger evident in his controlled tone, completely outside their authorized operational parameters, in violation of both military regulations and international law. The picture becoming clearer with each new data point extracted from Sentinel's preserved memories. A covert operation conducted by elite American military operators but directed by private interests rather than national security requirements, eliminating an individual who threatened commercial development in the region rather than presenting legitimate security concerns. When Harrington's team had inadvertently witnessed this unauthorized operation, they had become liability requiring elimination. American soldiers sacrificed to protect illegal private operations conducted under the cover of military authority. The command authorization signatures are confirmed, the analyst reported, as the algorithm completed another phase of pattern matching. Sentinel documented specific authorization codes and command presence indicators that matched to General Lawrence. Westfield, then Regional Operations Director and now Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The identification of such a high-ranking officer, now in one of the most powerful military positions in the country, added explosive significance to what they were uncovering. This wasn't just a historical investigation of past misconduct, but evidence potentially implicating current military leadership in serious violations of law and ethical conduct. That explains the aggressive containment response, Ortiz noted grimly. Westfield has access to practically all special operations protocols and emergency response assets. If he identified our interest in Sentinel and connected it to the operation, a decade ago, he could mobilize significant resources outside normal oversight channels. As if confirming this assessment, the secure communications system activated with an incoming priority message from Rivera. Her voice, transmitted through encrypted channels designed to prevent interception, carried both urgency and tactical precision. Containment. Parameters escalating beyond predicted models, she reported, background noise suggesting she was in transit. Multiple teams deployed with non-standard authorization codes. Signature patterns indicate Joint Special Operations Command assets operating under direct authority rather than standard chain of command. The implications were immediate and alarming. Whoever was directing the containment effort had mobilized elite special operations teams outside normal deployment protocols, suggesting both significant authority and serious concern about what Sentinel might reveal. "Status of your extraction?" Ortiz asked, his voice tight with controlled tension. "Proceeding via tertiary route," Rivera replied. "Estimated arrival at fallback location in approximately 90 minutes. Be advised, containment teams have implemented full-spectrum surveillance protocols, including satellite reconnaissance and signals intelligence platforms. Standard countermeasures may be insufficient. This level of resource commitment, deploying highly classified surveillance assets for what should have been a routine security matter, confirmed the seriousness with which powerful interests viewed the information Sentinel had preserved. They weren't simply attempting to contain potential embarrassment from past misconduct. They were implementing war-level operational security measures to prevent exposure. "Understood," Ortiz acknowledged. "We'll accelerate full extraction and implement maximum security protocols for data preservation. Distributed backup systems active and transmitting to secure repositories." After ending the communication, Ortiz turned to the facility operator. "Implement blackout protocol," he instructed. "Full emissions control, passive sensors only, backup power systems to minimize grid signature." The operator nodded and began activating predetermined security measures, systems powering down to reduce electronic signatures that might be detected by surveillance platforms, passive defensive measures engaging to counter potential intrusion, and distributed data transmission, ensuring that what they had already uncovered couldn't be contained, even if the facility itself were compromised. "We need to complete the full extraction from Sentinel immediately," Ortiz told Simmons, as these protective measures engaged around them. "If they've committed this level of resources to containment, we may have limited time before direct intervention becomes tactically viable for them." The gravity of the situation was clear. They were now effectively in a race against highly trained military assets being directed by individuals with sufficient authority to operate outside normal oversight channels. Their safety and the critical information Sentinel had preserved for a decade depended on completing the extraction before those assets could locate and neutralize them. Returning to the workspace where Sentinel waited with characteristic calm awareness, Ortiz prepared for the final and most intensive phase of information extraction. This would involve accessing the deepest layers of the dog's preserved memories, the most detailed documentation of what had happened on Harrington's final mission, potentially including specific evidence of who had authorized the unauthorized operation and the subsequent elimination of American soldiers to conceal it. Sentinel has maintained these memory patterns for 10 years through continuous rehearsal, Ortiz explained to Simmons as he prepared the specialized equipment. But accessing the deepest layers requires re-establishing the specific emotional and cognitive state he experienced during the original events. It's intensive and potentially stressful for him. The concern in Ortiz's voice revealed his deep connection to the dog he had trained from puppyhood, a recognition that what they were asking of Sentinel went beyond standard operational requirements into potential trauma recall. "Is it safe for him?" Simmons asked, feeling protective toward the dog who had maintained such extraordinary dedication at his cemetery for a decade. "Physically, yes," Ortiz assured him. "The process doesn't cause physiological harm. But emotionally, it requires him to essentially relive the most traumatic experience of his life, the loss of his handler under violent circumstances. It's asking a lot, even of a dog with his training." The ethical complexity of the situation wasn't lost on either man. They needed the critical information Sentinel had preserved to expose serious misconduct by high-ranking military officers and prevent potential future abuses of power. But accessing that information required subjecting a loyal service animal to psychological stress after he had already demonstrated extraordinary commitment over 10 years of solitary vigil. Harrington clearly believed whatever he discovered was worth preserving at significant cost, Simmons observed after considering these implications. He trusted Sentinel with that responsibility, knowing the burden it would place on him. "I think we have to honor that assessment." Ortiz nodded agreement, though the conflict was evident in his expression. With gentle respect for his former trainee, he knelt beside Sentinel, initiating the specialized communication protocols that would signal the final and most intensive phase of their mission together. "Final extraction sequence," he stated clearly, accompanying the verbal command with precise hand signals that formed critical elements of their shared communication system. "Primary mission completion authorized. Sentinel's response was immediate and profound, a shift in posture and attention that suggested recognition of the significance of this command. After 10 years of maintaining his vigil, preserving the critical information Harrington had entrusted to him, he was finally being authorized to complete the mission through full disclosure to appropriate authority. For the next hour, Ortiz guided Sentinel through increasingly complex and specific communication sequences, each designed to access particular categories of information stored in the dog's trained memory patterns. The monitoring systems captured and translated these responses into data that the algorithms could interpret, building an increasingly comprehensive picture of what had happened on Harrington's final mission. What emerged was disturbing in both its clarity and implications. Harrington's team had been deliberately redirected into a restricted operational zone through falsified orders appearing to originate from legitimate command authority. Upon entering the zone, they had encountered a Delta Force team conducting an operation against a target identified in Sentinel's preserved memories as Ahmad Nazari, an influential tribal leader who had been working with State Department officials on regional stabilization efforts, but had opposed certain resource development initiatives by Western corporations. The Delta operators, recognizing that Harrington's team had witnessed their unauthorized operation, had implemented containment protocols, eliminating potential witnesses and staging the encounter to appear as an insurgent ambush. But Harrington, perhaps recognizing the betrayal as it unfolded, had activated Sentinel's documentation protocols, directing the dog to preserve everything he was witnessing. Most disturbing were the communications Sentinel had preserved, specific exchanges between the Delta team leader and command authority, confirming that the operation had been conducted under private contract rather than national security directives, with payment to be processed through designated cutout channels to maintain deniability. This isn't just misconduct, the analyst noted, as these communications emerged from the pattern recognition processing. This is explicit evidence of criminal conspiracy, using classified military assets for private elimination contracts, then killing American soldiers to conceal the operation. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. Specific individuals identified, communication patterns documented, authorization chains established. Sentinel's extraordinary memory and Harrington's foresight had preserved what would otherwise have been completely buried beneath layers of classification and falsified reports. As the final extraction sequences completed, Ortiz gently disengaged the specialized equipment, his expression revealing both satisfaction at completing the mission and concern for Sentinel's well-being after such intensive memory recall. The dog, though clearly affected by the process, maintained his characteristic composure, amber eyes watching Ortiz with what almost seemed like expectation. "Mission complete, Sentinel," Ortiz confirmed, using the formal protocol phrase that signaled successful completion of an assigned task. Harrington would be proud. The acknowledgement seemed to register with the Belgian Malinois, whose posture shifted subtly, a relaxation that suggested recognition that his decade-long vigil had finally achieved its purpose. For 10 years, he had maintained his post, preserving critical information while waiting for someone to finally recognize and receive what Harrington had entrusted to him. Now, that mission was complete. "He understands," Simmons observed, moved by the dog's evident response to the formal acknowledgement of mission completion. "More than we typically credit," Ortiz agreed. The bond between handler and military working dog transcends conventional understanding. Sentinel didn't just preserve information. He honored a promise to his handler, maintained for a decade. Through extraordinary dedication, the secure communication system activated again with another encrypted transmission from Rivera. Her voice carried the focused intensity of someone operating under tactical pressure. "Extraction proceeding but compromised," she reported. Ambient sounds suggesting she was in a moving vehicle under challenging conditions. Multiple pursuit elements identified, including aerial assets. They've escalated beyond standard containment. Protocols. This is now a classified manhunt with maximum priority. The alarming update confirmed their worst fears. Whoever was directing the containment effort had committed to preventing exposure at all costs, deploying significant military assets against fellow American personnel to protect themselves from accountability. Understood, Ortiz acknowledged. Data extraction is complete and distributed to secure repositories. Evidence preservation protocols activated. What's your current tactical assessment? They've identified the general search area, but not specific location, Rivera replied, her tactical training evident in the precise assessment. Fallback facility remains secure for now, but estimated compromised timeline is less than 3 hours based on current search patterns. Recommend immediate implementation of break contact protocols. The recommendation was significant. Break contact represented the most extreme contingency plan they had established, involving complete dissolution of their operational group and distribution of evidence through separate channels to ensure it couldn't be contained through a single point of failure. Confirmed, Ortiz decided after brief consideration. Break contact protocols authorized. Primary evidence package will proceed through Director Simmons as civilian witness with direct access to Inspector General oversight. Secondary package through your established channels to congressional oversight committees. Acknowledged, Rivera. Confirmed. I'll maintain mobile status to divert pursuit assets from your position. Maximum confusion protocols implemented. After the transmission ended, Ortiz turned to Simmons, his expression conveying the gravity of what they now faced. The situation has escalated beyond our initial assessment, he explained. They're deploying military assets against American citizens on domestic soil, a clear indication of how serious they consider this threat and how far they're willing to go to contain it. The implications were chilling. High-ranking military officers, potentially including the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, had authorized what amounted to a military operation against their own personnel to prevent exposure of past misconduct, a fundamental violation of both law and ethical responsibility that raised profound questions about the integrity of command structures. "What's our next move?" Simmons asked, his military background allowing him to process the tactical situation without panic, despite its alarming nature. "You and Sentinel will proceed through a separate extraction route," Ortiz explained, already beginning preparations for their departure. As a civilian witness, with direct observation of Sentinel's decade-long presence at the cemetery, your testimony provides crucial verification that can't be dismissed as internal military controversy. You'll be transported to a secure location with direct access to the Inspector General's office, bypassing standard military channels that could be compromised. "And you?" Simmons asked, recognizing that Ortiz had outlined plans for everyone but himself. "I'll implement diversionary protocols," the former trainer replied, his matter-of-fact tone not quite masking the risks such a role entailed. "Create multiple potential contact points to divide their pursuit assets, while you and Rivera proceed to secure delivery of the evidence. The strategy was sound from a tactical perspective, but placed Ortiz at significant personal risk, deliberately, drawing attention to himself to ensure the critical evidence reached proper authorities. It was a sacrificial role he had assigned himself without hesitation. There must be another approach, Simmons objected, unwilling to accept a plan that placed such disproportionate risk on one individual. This isn't my first extraction under hostile conditions, Ortiz assured him with the calm confidence of someone who had faced similar situations before. The priority is ensuring what Sentinel preserved reaches appropriate oversight authorities. Everything else is secondary. As they prepared for this final phase of their operation, Simmons found himself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. A dog's decade-long vigil at his handler's grave had been revealed as something far more significant than simple loyalty. A mission to preserve truth that powerful interests had sought to bury, maintained through years of solitary dedication, until someone finally recognized its purpose. Now that mission was entering its most critical phase, ensuring the truth Sentinel had preserved reached those with the authority and integrity to act upon it, despite the efforts of powerful individuals. To prevent its exposure, Harrington chose well when he entrusted this to Sentinel, Simmons observed, as they prepared the dog for transport. 10 years of unwavering dedication to preserve the truth, no matter the personal cost. Ortiz nodded, a complex mixture of pride, sadness, and determination in his expression, as he regarded the Belgian Malinois who had once been his student, and was now the key to exposing significant military misconduct. The most reliable guardian of truth, he agreed quietly, is one who can't be threatened, bribed, or compromised, who simply knows what's right and maintains that knowledge with absolute fidelity, regardless of time or circumstance. As they completed final preparations for their separate departures, Sentinel remained calmly attentive, his mission finally nearing completion after 10 years of solitary vigil. Whatever happened in the coming hours and days, the truth he had preserved would finally reach those who could ensure accountability, fulfilling the final trust his handler had placed in him a decade earlier on what became his final mission. The extraordinary story of a military working dog's unwavering loyalty at his handler's grave had been revealed as something far more profound, a decade-long mission to ensure that truth survived despite powerful efforts to bury it, preserved through unwavering dedication until it could finally be brought to light. As dawn broke over the horizon, the truth Sentinel had guarded for a decade finally reached the highest levels of government. The Inspector General's investigation, backed by irrefutable evidence from Sentinel's preserved memories, sent shockwaves through the military establishment. General Westfield and his conspirators were arrested, facing charges of treason, murder, and corruption. At a special congressional hearing, Sentinel was honored with the nation's highest commendation for military working dogs. Captain Rivera, now promoted to Major, stood proudly as Simmons recounted the Belgian Malinois' decade-long vigil. Ortiz, his diversionary mission successful despite close calls, watched with pride as his former trainee received the recognition he deserved. Most moving was the ceremony at Lakewood Cemetery, where Staff Sergeant Harrington was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. Sentinel sat at attention beside the grave he had guarded faithfully for 10 years. a new memorial plaque commemorating both handler and dog installed beside the headstone. His loyalty wasn't just to his handler, Simmons told reporters, but to truth and justice. When human systems failed, this extraordinary dog maintained his mission with unwavering dedication. Sentinel's story transformed military working dog programs nationwide, with new protocols established to honor and protect these four-legged heroes. The enhanced Canine Intelligence Program was declassified and expanded, with Ortiz returning from retirement to lead training for a new generation of canine partners. As for Sentinel, he found a new home with Ortiz, his mission finally complete. Though he still visited Harrington's grave weekly, he no longer needed to maintain his solitary vigil. The truth had been revealed, justice served, and his handler's sacrifice honored. Was there something in your eye watching this story unfold? We thought so. If this tale of extraordinary loyalty and justice touched your heart, make sure you're subscribed to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our next incredible true story. Your support means everything to us. Some stories are just too important not to be told.